Imagine walking into a 1960s grocery store and picking up products so bizarre by today's standards, they'd be banned outright. From radioactive additives to banned chemicals, these everyday items were downright shocking. Looking back, you'll wonder, how was this ever considered normal? Curious minds might raise an eyebrow at the idea that, during the 1960s, individuals resorted to an unlikely source of nourishment: canned dog food. A few families saw it as a last resort in times of hardship. Far from modern-day grocery aisles brimming with processed dinners, resources could be so thin that this canine cuisine found its way onto human plates. Officials often overlooked the contents, leaving potential bacterial hazards unchecked, which wasn't a five-star guarantee of safety. Surprisingly, there was minimal pushback from authorities regarding its distribution. Without modern health inspections, contamination occasionally slipped by, raising concerns about sanitation and disease. Despite these risks, the product's easy availability attracted desperate shoppers, who discovered it was cheaper than most meat options. That affordability turned it into a peculiar standby, although tastiness was sometimes questionable at best. Regulations were not particularly strict back then, so certain labels didn't specify the exact ingredients lurking within each can. Reflecting on that era reveals a culture willing to stretch a dollar when the cupboard ran bare. In an era defined by boundless optimism and experimental remedies, a curious tonic emerged: Radithor, or radioactive water. During a time when scientific breakthroughs were celebrated without the benefit of modern safety protocols, this radium-infused elixir was marketed as a miracle drink, promising renewed vitality. Companies boldly touted its rejuvenating properties while food safety oversight was in its infancy, and regulations lagged behind the fervor for innovation. Although endorsements by well-known figures lent it credibility, users eventually discovered that regular consumption led to severe health risks, including bone decay and radiation poisoning, a grim reminder that not every scientific experiment was a step forward. Intriguingly, advertisements depicted Radithor as a fountain of youth in a bottle, a claim that today would undoubtedly trigger public outcry rather than applause. Its popularity stemmed from the era's trust in emerging technologies and a willingness to embrace unconventional treatments during uncertain times. The tale of Radithor serves as a compelling chapter in our culinary and pharmaceutical history, highlighting a period when progress sometimes outpaced prudence. Olestra was born out of the 1960s drive to reinvent everyday food. This fat substitute promised guilt-free indulgence without the extra calories. Its introduction coincided with a time when scientific optimism often outpaced regulatory oversight. As the industry celebrated a marvel of chemical engineering, food safety protocols were only just beginning to catch up, leaving a gap that allowed unanticipated health concerns to emerge. Consumers embraced Olestra for its novelty and promise of a lighter future, even as emerging reports hinted at severe gastrointestinal distress. Laboratory findings eventually revealed that, while free of traditional fat calories, this compound could disrupt the absorption of essential vitamins and cause digestive discomfort. This paradox, a product engineered to aid dietary goals that ultimately compromised nutritional well-being, became a cautionary tale in modern food history. Interestingly, advertisements once lauded Olestra as the solution for those seeking to enjoy their favorite snacks without compromise. However, as adverse effects accumulated, both scientists and regulators pushed for tighter safety measures, marking a significant turning point in food additive scrutiny. In a period marked by rapid industrialization and cost-cutting innovations, one controversial ingredient left its mark on the processed meat industry: canned pink slime meat. Emerging as a byproduct of the 1960s surge in mass-produced foods, this product was initially celebrated for its efficiency and affordability, which resonated with a public eager for convenience amid economic uncertainties. At a time when regulatory oversight was still developing, its inclusion in everyday meals proceeded with minimal scrutiny, a situation that would later prompt significant policy revisions. Although it provided an economical solution for meat processors, consumers soon discovered that the product harbored potential health risks, ranging from digestive disturbances to concerns over long-term exposure to industrial chemicals. Advertisements touted its value as an innovative way to extend meat supplies, a claim that seemed almost too good to be true once adverse health impacts came to light. As the scientific community began to unravel the full implications of ingesting such additives, regulatory agencies tightened standards and its usage was eventually curtailed in many applications. A household staple for decades, canned tuna was a go-to choice for quick meals and affordable protein. Packed with convenience and a mild flavor that fit everything from sandwiches to casseroles, its popularity surged throughout the 20th century. But hidden beneath its silver lid was an ingredient no one had bargained for: mercury. Some brands of tuna contained alarmingly high levels of the toxic metal, a risk that went largely unnoticed in the 1960s when food safety regulations had yet to catch up with modern science. Back then, concerns over contaminants weren't front-page news. The average consumer had little reason to suspect that a simple tuna salad might come with a side of neurological damage. Mercury, a heavy metal that can accumulate in the body, posed serious health risks, especially for pregnant women and young children. Symptoms of mercury poisoning included cognitive impairments, muscle weakness, and developmental issues, hardly what anyone expected from a lunchtime staple. As research progressed, regulatory agencies stepped in. By the 1970s, the FDA began imposing stricter limits on mercury levels in seafood, and today, guidelines recommend limiting the consumption of certain fish. Few chemical names have caused as much unnecessary panic as dihydrogen monoxide. Despite sounding like something from a lab experiment gone wrong, this so-called hazardous substance was, in reality, nothing more than water. The term became the centerpiece of a long-running joke, highlighting how scientific jargon could manipulate public perception. In an era when food safety concerns were growing, misinformation had the power to create fear, even over something as essential as water. The 1960s saw increasing scrutiny over food additives, preservatives, and chemical compounds in everyday products. With rising concerns about artificial ingredients, people became more wary of what they consumed. The dihydrogen monoxide hoax played into that anxiety, proving how a lack of understanding could turn a necessity into a perceived threat. The irony? Every person alarmed by its presence had already been consuming it their entire lives. Though water itself is harmless in moderation, it's technically possible to overdose on it, a rare but real condition called water intoxication, where excessive consumption disrupts the body's sodium levels. By the 1960s, soda had become more than just a refreshing treat. It was a cultural icon. With its bold flavors, flashy advertisements, and promises of instant energy, it was a staple of American life. But some brands took that last promise a little too far. High-caffeine soda wasn't just about a quick pick-me-up. Some of these carbonated concoctions packed as much caffeine as several cups of coffee in a single bottle. At a time when regulations were still catching up to the booming food and beverage industry, caffeine content wasn't something most consumers thought to question. For those needing an extra boost, whether for a long shift, a late-night study session, or just to keep up with the fast pace of modern life, these sodas were a tempting choice. But what went down easy didn't always sit well. Excessive caffeine consumption could lead to heart palpitations, anxiety, and even dependency. Some drinkers learned the hard way that too much of a good thing wasn't always a good thing. As research into caffeine's effects grew, regulations tightened. Today, sodas still contain caffeine, but the extreme levels once found in certain brands have been curbed. In the 1960s, packaging was more about durability and design than long-term safety, and nowhere was that more evident than in lead-based paint on food containers. Vibrant labels, eye-catching colors, and a sturdy finish made these containers look appealing on store shelves. But hidden beneath the surface was a toxic hazard. Lead-based paint, commonly used in everything from household walls to children's toys, also found its way onto food packaging, a decision that, in hindsight, was as dangerous as it sounds. At the time, lead's risks weren't fully understood by the general public. While scientists had long suspected its dangers, regulations were slow to catch up. The problem was that lead doesn't just stay on the surface. Over time, it can leach into food, especially acidic products like canned tomatoes. Consumers had no way of knowing that their favorite pantry staples might come with a side of neurotoxicity. The health risks were severe. Chronic exposure to lead can cause developmental issues in children, memory problems in adults, and even organ failure in extreme cases. As research mounted, the government stepped in. By the late 1970s, lead-based paints were banned from food-related products. In the mid-20th century, the agricultural industry was on a mission to maximize production, and antibiotics played a key role in that effort. One in particular, chloramphenicol, became a popular choice for keeping livestock healthy and increasing meat yields. Farmers saw it as an efficient way to prevent infections in crowded conditions, while food producers benefited from higher output. For a time, it seemed like a win-win until scientists uncovered the serious health risks lurking beneath the surface. Unlike some antibiotics that merely disrupt digestion, chloramphenicol posed a far more alarming danger: aplastic anemia, a rare but potentially fatal condition where the body stops producing enough blood cells. The problem wasn't just with direct exposure. Traces of the antibiotic could linger in meat and dairy products, making their way onto dinner tables across the country. Consumers had no way of knowing that their Sunday roast might come with a side of medical complications. As evidence mounted, regulators took action. By the 1980s, chloramphenicol was banned in food production in many countries, including the United States. Today, strict testing ensures that no remnants make it into the food supply. Preserving food has always been a challenge, but some solutions turned out to be worse than the problem itself. In the 1960s, some manufacturers used formaldehyde, yes, the same chemical used to embalm corpses, as a preservative in food packaging and even certain processed meats. The reasoning was simple. Formaldehyde could prevent spoilage and extend shelf life, making products more durable for transportation and storage. Unfortunately, what was good for logistics wasn't exactly good for human health. At the time, food safety regulations were still evolving. The long-term effects of exposure to certain chemicals weren't fully understood, and manufacturers often took advantage of the regulatory gaps. Formaldehyde wasn't just a byproduct. It was deliberately applied to some food products, keeping meats from spoiling and even preventing mold growth in baked goods. The catch? It's a known carcinogen and toxic in even small doses. Though its risks were largely unknown to the public, scientists began raising alarms about its potential to cause respiratory issues, digestive distress, and even cancer. By the late 1970s, stricter regulations forced food manufacturers to abandon its use. Of all the risky delicacies in food history, few come with stakes as high as canned puffer fish. Revered for its delicate taste, yet feared for its lethal potential, this fish contains tetrodotoxin, a neurotoxin so potent that a dose smaller than a pinhead can cause paralysis and death. Today, only highly trained chefs are allowed to prepare it, but in the past, access was far less controlled. In unregulated markets, improperly prepared fugu was available in cans, turning a simple meal into a gamble with survival. The appeal of fugu wasn't just about flavor, it was about thrill. For some, eating it was a status symbol, a culinary daredevil act that proved one's bravery. But unlike most food-related risks, this one didn't end with an upset stomach. There's no antidote for tetrodotoxin, meaning a mistake in preparation could be fatal. Yet, regulations in the 1960s weren't nearly as strict as they are today, and canned versions were sold in some markets without the careful oversight now required. As reports of poisoning surfaced, authorities clamped down. Many countries banned unregulated sales, limiting its preparation to certified chefs. In the mid-20th century, sweetness wasn't just a preference, it was a selling point. Few products embodied this better than sweetened condensed milk with excessive sugar. A staple in many households, this thick, syrupy dairy product was beloved for its versatility, affordability, and long shelf life. It made its way into pies, coffee, and even baby formula. But for all its convenience, there was one problem. Some brands packed in so much sugar that it was closer to candy than milk. During the 1960s, food manufacturers weren't required to disclose sugar content as rigorously as they are today. Without standardized labeling, some versions contained sugar levels far beyond what would now be considered safe for daily consumption. The excess wasn't just about taste, it was a cheap preservative, extending the product's shelf life and making it more appealing to budget-conscious shoppers. But as studies linked high sugar intake to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, health experts began sounding the alarm. By the late 20th century, regulations introduced stricter labeling requirements, and sugar content in condensed milk was brought under control. Seafood has long been praised as a healthy, protein-rich option, but in the 1960s, some portions came with an unexpected side effect: mercury exposure. As industrial pollution increased, heavy metals made their way into oceans and rivers, accumulating in fish that millions consumed daily. At the time, awareness of mercury's dangers was limited, and food regulations had yet to impose strict monitoring. Consumers enjoyed their seafood dinners unaware that certain species carried levels of the toxic element high enough to pose serious health risks. Mercury is particularly insidious because it builds up in the body over time. While a single meal wouldn't cause immediate harm, consistent exposure could lead to neurological damage, developmental issues in children, and even kidney failure. Pregnant women were at the highest risk, as mercury could interfere with fetal brain development. Yet, in the mid-century push for convenience and affordability, few questioned what lurked beneath the surface of their favorite fish dishes. It wasn't until the 1970s, after growing scientific research and public outcry, that regulatory agencies like the FDA established strict mercury limits in seafood. Bright, bold, and eye-catching, color mattered in the 1960s food industry, and few additives were as widely used as red No. 2 or amaranth. From candies to cake frosting, this synthetic dye gave processed foods an irresistible vibrancy. It was cheap, effective, and made everything look more appealing. But what manufacturers saw as a marketing advantage, scientists would later recognize as a serious health risk. At the time, food dyes weren't scrutinized as heavily as they are today. The general belief was that if a product made it to store shelves, it had to be safe. Red No. 2 was everywhere, with little concern for long-term effects. But as research advanced, animal studies suggested a troubling connection between this popular dye and potential carcinogenic properties. Though the data wasn't conclusive for humans, the idea of a cancer-causing colorant lurking in everyday foods was enough to raise alarms. Public pressure mounted, and by the 1970s, the FDA banned Red No. 2 in the US, following similar actions in Europe. While other artificial dyes remained in use, this case marked a turning point in food safety regulations. Processed meats have long been a fixture of the American diet, offering convenience, affordability, and a satisfying smoky flavor. But there was one key ingredient that made these meats last longer and look more appetizing: sodium nitrate. In the 1960s, it was used liberally in everything from bacon to hot dogs, ensuring bright red hues and extended shelf life. Few questioned what made their deli meat so vibrant, but as science advanced, concerns began to emerge. At the time, food preservation was a priority, and sodium nitrate was seen as a practical solution. It prevented bacterial growth and gave processed meats a signature cured taste. However, researchers later discovered a darker side. When exposed to high heat, sodium nitrate could form nitrosamines, compounds linked to cancer in animal studies. While a single ham sandwich wasn't a cause for alarm, a lifetime of consuming highly processed meats raised significant health concerns. By the 1970s, regulatory agencies stepped in, limiting nitrate levels and requiring careful monitoring. While still legal today in controlled amounts, many consumers now seek nitrate-free options. The story of sodium nitrate serves as a reminder that food science is constantly evolving. By the mid-20th century, the pursuit of guilt-free sweetness was in full swing. Sugar alternatives promised all the flavor with none of the calories, and few artificial sweeteners were as widely embraced as saccharin. First discovered in the late 1800s, it wasn't until the 1960s and 70s that it became a staple in diet sodas, processed foods, and even table sweeteners. With no clear regulations on its long-term effects, it was marketed as the perfect solution for those looking to cut sugar without sacrificing taste. But what seemed like a miracle ingredient soon came under scrutiny. Early animal studies linked saccharin to bladder cancer in lab rats, triggering widespread concern. While the findings weren't immediately confirmed in humans, the idea of a potentially carcinogenic sweetener sitting in coffee cups across the country was enough to prompt action. By the late 1970s, the FDA required warning labels on products containing saccharin, and in some places, bans followed. Further research eventually led to a reversal of some of those restrictions, but the damage to saccharin's reputation was done. Today, it's still used in limited capacities, though consumers have largely moved on to other artificial sweeteners. Long before tobacco was widely recognized as a public health hazard, it was used in ways that would raise eyebrows today. One of the strangest? Tobacco-flavored cough syrup. At a time when smoking was still being advertised by doctors and marketed as a remedy for stress, it wasn't all that shocking to find tobacco making its way into medicinal syrups. After all, if it was good enough for a cigarette, why not a sore throat? Throughout the early to mid-20th century, cough syrups were often packed with ingredients that, in hindsight, sound more like the makings of a problem than a cure. Some contained opiates, others had alcohol, and a few, incredibly, were infused with nicotine or tobacco extracts. The idea was that the plant's natural properties could help suppress coughs and open up airways. And while the logic might have sounded reasonable at the time, the reality was far from beneficial. By the 1960s and 70s, the tide had begun to turn against tobacco. Research linked it to lung disease, cancer, and addiction, and regulators cracked down. By the late 20th century, tobacco-flavored medicines had all but disappeared. Exotic, crunchy, and once considered a delicacy, fried tarantulas had their moment in the 1960s, particularly in regions where food scarcity led to creative solutions. For communities where protein sources were limited, these sizable arachnids provided a readily available alternative. Their crispy texture and mild, slightly nutty flavor made them more palatable than one might expect. But despite their surprising popularity, fried tarantulas eventually found themselves on the wrong side of food safety regulations. The problem wasn't the spiders themselves, but how they were sourced and prepared. Unlike traditional livestock, tarantulas weren't raised under controlled conditions. They were often harvested straight from the wild, bringing the risk of contamination, parasites, and pesticide exposure. Without proper regulation, ensuring their safety for human consumption became a significant challenge. In time, government agencies stepped in, restricting the sale of wild-caught tarantulas for food. Concerns over disease transmission and the lack of standard processing methods led to widespread bans. While some enthusiasts still seek them out in niche markets, they are far from the common snack they once were. The smoky aroma of grilled meat has been a staple of backyard cookouts for generations. But in the 1960s, few people realized that along with the rich, charred flavor came an unwanted ingredient: benzopyrene. This carcinogenic compound, produced when fat drips onto an open flame, was an unavoidable byproduct of grilling. At the time, the science behind food safety was still catching up, and the risks of long-term exposure weren't widely understood. People focused on the taste, not the chemistry. Grilled meats were everywhere, from summer barbecues to fast food chains expanding their menus. That irresistible crust created through high-heat cooking was part of the appeal. But scientists later discovered that benzopyrene, a type of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, could bind to DNA and increase the risk of cancer. The more charred the meat, the higher the concentration. Yet in the mid-century dining landscape, warnings about grilling techniques weren't exactly at the forefront of public health discussions. Regulations have since evolved, with agencies like the FDA and WHO advising moderation when it comes to heavily charred foods. While grilling remains a beloved cooking method, the way we approach it has changed. In the 1960s, soft drinks weren't just beverages. They were a way of life. Packed with sugar, carbonation, and a signature fizz, they were marketed as the perfect refreshment. But hidden inside many of these drinks was sodium benzoate, a preservative used to prevent spoilage and extend shelf life. While still legal today, its use in the past was far more liberal, with some sodas containing amounts that would raise eyebrows by modern standards. At the time, consumers weren't particularly concerned with food additives. If a soda stayed fresh for months, even years on the shelf, that was seen as a selling point. But as research advanced, concerns emerged about sodium benzoate's potential side effects. When combined with ascorbic acid, it could form benzene, a known carcinogen. Some studies also suggested it might contribute to hyperactivity in children and even damage DNA in high concentrations. Regulatory agencies eventually stepped in, imposing stricter limits on its use and requiring companies to adjust their formulas. While sodium benzoate is still found in some drinks, manufacturers now use far lower amounts than in the past. For much of the 20th century, canned meat was a pantry essential, affordable, long-lasting, and ready to eat. But hidden among the more familiar varieties was an ingredient that many consumers didn't realize they were eating: horse meat. While still consumed in some cultures today, its presence in canned foods was far more common in the past, especially in the 1960s, when it was used as a cheap filler in everything from stews to luncheon meat. At the time, labeling laws weren't as strict, and manufacturers weren't always transparent about what went into their products. If the can simply said beef or meat, there was no guarantee it wasn't something else. Horse meat was lean, high in protein, and most importantly, cheaper than traditional livestock, making it an attractive option for food producers. And while it wasn't inherently unsafe to eat, the real problem came from contamination risks and unethical sourcing. As food safety regulations improved, so did scrutiny over meat processing. By the late 20th century, horse meat and canned goods became highly regulated or outright banned in many countries, including the US. Few scents are as instantly recognizable as the rich, buttery aroma of freshly popped popcorn. But in the mid-20th century, that unmistakable smell often came from a chemical rather than dairy. Artificial butter flavoring, or diacetyl, became a common ingredient in microwave popcorn, margarine, and other processed foods, offering an affordable way to mimic the real thing. At a time when convenience foods were on the rise, manufacturers saw it as a perfect shortcut, one that delivered full-flavored appeal without the cost of actual butter. But while diacetyl made foods taste richer, it also carried risks that wouldn't come to light for decades. In industrial settings, workers exposed to airborne diacetyl began developing severe respiratory illnesses, including a rare condition later dubbed popcorn lung. The name might sound cartoonish, but the effects were anything but. Prolonged exposure could cause irreversible lung damage, leading to chronic coughing and shortness of breath. Regulatory agencies eventually intervened, restricting its use in certain food production environments and mandating safer handling practices. While diacetyl is still found in some products today, many companies have removed or replaced it. For much of the 20th century, pork was a dinnertime staple, served in everything from sausage links to Sunday roasts. But in the 1960s, a hidden danger lurked in every bite: trichinosis-infected pork. Caused by a parasitic roundworm, trichinosis was a serious risk for anyone eating raw or undercooked pork, and back then, proper cooking guidelines weren't always followed as strictly as they are today. The appeal of pork was obvious. It was affordable, versatile, and packed with flavor. But many traditional preparations, such as homemade sausages and rare-cooked pork dishes, created the perfect conditions for infection. Once inside the body, the parasite could cause fever, muscle pain, and in severe cases, organ damage. The issue wasn't fully understood by the general public, and food safety regulations were still catching up. By the 1970s, major reforms in pork processing and stricter USDA inspections dramatically reduced the risk. Freezing pork at regulated temperatures killed the parasite, and public awareness campaigns taught consumers to cook their meat to safer temperatures. By the 1960s, coffee wasn't just a beverage, it was a way of life. Americans were drinking it by the gallon, fueling workdays, social gatherings, and late-night study sessions. But what most people didn't know was that some brands were using unregulated chemicals in coffee to speed up roasting and enhance flavor. Efficiency was the goal, and if a few extra compounds made the process faster, all the better. At least that was the thinking at the time. Roasting coffee is an art, but it's also a time-consuming process. To cut costs and maximize production, some manufacturers turned to chemical accelerants. These additives helped beans roast quicker and gave them a consistent, rich color. The problem? Some of these chemicals weren't exactly meant for human consumption. Without strict oversight, certain compounds made it into the final product, leaving consumers unknowingly sipping on substances that hadn't been tested for long-term safety. As scientific studies advanced, concerns over these chemicals grew. Some were linked to respiratory issues, while others raised red flags for potential toxicity. By the late 20th century, regulators stepped in, banning unsafe additives and enforcing stricter guidelines on coffee production. In the pursuit of cheaper, longer-lasting food, some manufacturers in the 1960s turned to questionable additives, and few were as concerning as melamine in food. Originally used in plastics and industrial products, melamine found its way into food manufacturing as a way to artificially boost protein levels in processed goods. Though later infamous for its role in counterfeit milk scandals, melamine contamination was a hidden danger even decades earlier. At the time, protein content was a major selling point for food products, and testing methods relied on nitrogen levels to measure it. Melamine, rich in nitrogen, fooled these tests, making food appear more nutritious than it actually was. Unsuspecting consumers, meanwhile, had no idea their pantry staples contained an industrial compound with no place in a human diet. The health risks were severe. Melamine can cause kidney stones, organ failure, and long-term toxicity when consumed in significant amounts. Despite these dangers, regulations lagged behind, allowing its presence in certain products to go unnoticed. It wasn't until stricter food safety laws emerged in the late 20th century that melamine contamination was fully addressed. The Austin Magic Pistol, a toy of the 1950s, exemplifies America's post-war innovation and the era's relaxed approach to safety. Distinguished by its use of magic crystals that, when combined with water, propelled a plastic ball with a bang, this toy captured the imagination of many a young sharpshooter. However, its operation, essentially a controlled explosion, raised eyebrows. Classified as a firearm in numerous states today, the Austin Magic Pistol's fall from grace reflects a growing awareness of the need for stringent safety measures in children's playthings, a sign of changing times in American society. Remember Hormel? Connoisseurs of canned cuisine? They brought corned beef hash to the States in around the 1970s. This hearty breakfast dish has survived the tests of time, as it would be discontinued then brought back almost instantaneously, until the beef hash found a permanent place in American cuisine. The food has ties to WW2, as it was a lot more popular back then to eat canned options or packaged food. Beef hash was particularly well-liked because meat was hard to come by at the time. Fresh meat in particular was always rationed immediately. This made Hormel products a must-buy for people back in the day. While hash has been around in America for even longer, it became really popular in the 40s. Though in the post-war era, it did fall off in popularity, urging the company to discontinue the product. Beef hash made a comeback in the 70s when inflation hit, as people were looking for cheaper alternatives. Since then, this dish has slowly been making a return to many restaurants these days, especially as a cheap takeout option. Of traditions, one long-held custom in upper society and luxury cuisine was beluga caviar, as you may have heard. The USA had an infamously high appetite for it, consuming around 60% of the world's caviar, but that meant that, like sharks, beluga sturgeons were not safe in their own waters. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had to ban the buying or selling of any beluga products, as the fish today faces a serious threat of extinction because of overfishing. It might be tasty, but there's certainly no need to fish enough of them to wipe their entire gene pool clean. At least we think that's the sane take. Caviar is still one of the most widely consumed luxury cuisines in America, but beluga caviar has been effectively banned from mass production. Who knows? Maybe one day the rest of the caviar varieties may suffer the same fate.
The Forever Yours bar, debuting in the 30s and evolving into the Milky Way Dark in the 80s, captured hearts with its dark chocolate, vanilla nougat, and caramel. It was the hidden gem in Halloween halls, the coveted treat that sparked trades and negotiations among friends. This bar was a symbol of special occasions, often shared during moments of celebration or as a comfort during movie marathons on rainy days. The Forever Yours bar was rebranded and eventually replaced by newer products. This reflected changing market strategies and consumer tastes. Its essence persists, serving as a reminder of the bonds formed over shared sweets. The Easy Bake Oven, a beloved toy since 1963, found itself under scrutiny in 2007. Known for allowing children to craft their own culinary creations, this seemingly harmless device led to an unexpected danger. Reports of children getting their fingers stuck, with some cases resulting in burns severe enough to necessitate surgery, prompted a massive recall of approximately 1 million units. This incident served as a stark reminder of the evolving understanding of toy safety, leading to a redesigned Easy Bake Oven that prioritized accessibility and safety, ensuring that future chefs could bake without fear.
How could we forget eggnog, a holiday favorite that has been a part of American cuisine for a long while? To anyone who has ever had any fond Christmas memories, it simply is not the holiday season until it is eggnog time. Americans love eggnog for its spicy notes and using some of their favorite ingredients. Stuff like rum, milk, and eggs are in the heart of any real U.S. citizen. It is surprising that a dish only made a year can last so long. Eggnog never got discontinued because their recipe was available to everyone at all times. The same fate cannot be told about companies that tried to sell bottled eggnog in the off-brand season. Many milk plants produced packaged eggnog to sell in seasons outside for Christmas, but due to lack of sales, these operations would often immediately shut down. Less and less people would find eggnog in markets once Christmas was over. Fortunately, a few milk processing facilities decided to resume year-round production of eggnog, albeit on a small scale. This allowed for true eggnog lovers to find this packaged drink in specialty stores and in limited locations. This trend of exhausting an entire populations of animals for culinary thrills had spread to a lot more than just life beneath the sea. An example is foie gras, which was created by having ducks and geese go through a rather harmful diet of corn. To the point, they were force-fed the corn to ensure that they were fattened up properly. The damage this did to their livers cannot be stated in simple words, but the livers were the main part, so the market saw no reason to stop its routines. California was one of the first states to step up about it and ban this activity, even though the move got backlash. But even the Supreme Court rejected a case for removing the ban. Hopefully, the rest of the country takes a hint too, because the act of foie gras is quite unethical. Fortunately, most states have now banned force-fed and harmful diets for animals and thus automatically deemed foie gras illegal.
The Powerhouse Bar, originating from the spirited 20s, accompanied many through the vibrant 70s. It was a staple for road trips in station wagons, a hearty snack that satiated hunger on long journeys to national parks or on the way to summer camps. Its rich blend of peanuts, fudge, and caramel became synonymous with the anticipation of adventure, a reliable source of energy for explorers and dreamers alike. Sadly, by the late 80s, the Powerhouse Bar was no longer in production. Evolving market trends and consumer preferences toward newer, flashier candy options played a role. Its essence as a beacon of sustenance and nostalgia endures, reminiscent of a time when journeys were measured by sights seen and candies savored. Barbie Rollerblade, a toy that sparkled with the promise of fun, took a sharp turn towards safety concerns in 1992. These dolls, equipped with rollerblades that emitted real sparks, captured the imagination of many until the potential fire hazard they posed came to light. The recall of Barbie rollerblade skates underscored the complexities of integrating dynamic features into toys and the paramount importance of thorough safety testing. This incident not only highlighted the challenges of innovation in toy design, but also reinforced the enduring commitment to safeguarding the joy and well-being of children.
We are still continuing the Meat Express because next on the list is Salisbury steak. Dietitian James Salisbury invented the steaks to help out with increased digestive issues and illnesses that were spreading rapidly in the U.S. The now dinner staple, Salisbury steak, involved a hamburger patty and was mostly known to be a steak with high-quality beef and gravies. The healthy aspect was ensured by keeping the gravies homemade and the beef clean. The Salisbury steak started losing customers as illnesses started to decrease in the populace. As a result, lots of restaurants stopped serving it regularly. However, now it is returning. Whether that is due to digestive issues coming back with it or a growing love for the vintage, you can find this at American Steak much more commonly now. Jell-O gelatin is a pretty tasty treat for an even better price for those who remember it. But did you know how many artificial sweeteners and harmful dyes were loaded in this one? If the past few names on the list were bad to you, then this might cause you to stop and think for a bit. A lot of additional stuff used in the gelatin, especially lots of food dyes for its various different flavors, were pretty harmful and caused skin issues as well as bloating, stomach discomfort, and nausea. With the way people consumed them, these otherwise lighter symptoms spiraled out to the point where long-term, people's immune systems were going down the drain. This made them vulnerable to a lot more than just one specific type of health nightmare. Luckily, there was a push for gelatin products with no food dyes in the market, and brands like Kroger responded with new lines of Jell-O without all the worrisome fake stuff.
Since the 1920s, the O. Henry candy bar has been a fixture in American snacking, reaching its zenith in the 70s. Its hearty mix of peanuts, caramel, and fudge was the perfect accompaniment to double-feature movies at the drive-in, where the glow of the screen illuminated faces eager with anticipation. This bar was a reward for chores completed, a sweet incentive that made raking leaves or washing cars slightly more bearable. Although its popularity has waned, the O. Henry candy bar faced discontinuation. Competitive pressures and changing consumer tastes were to blame. It remains a beloved relic, evoking memories of shared laughter in dimly lit theaters and the simple joy of a job well done. Then, the tale of the Cabbage Patch Kids Snack Time Kids dolls, a late 90s sensation, brings a modern twist to our nostalgic journey. These dolls, designed to eat snacks fed by their young owners, captured hearts until an unforeseen hazard emerged. The mechanism that enabled this unique feature also posed a risk of entangling children's fingers and hair, leading to a recall in 1997. This incident highlights the ongoing challenges faced by toy manufacturers and regulators in ensuring the safety of innovative toys, a reminder of the delicate balance between creativity and caution in the world of children's playthings.
Important American events like the Super Bowl or baseball leagues would be incomplete without dishes like pigs in a blanket. People would have a hard time choosing whether they wanted crispy food or soft, meaty dishes. This problem was solved by the pigs in a blanket. The food took America's two favorites, pastry and hot dogs, then fused them together to create an incredible and hearty snack. Pigs in a blanket were chopped hot dogs embedded in a flaky, crispy pastry dough. They first made their debut in Betty Crocker's Cooking for Boys and Girls. Now, like many foods, they fell in popularity as newer fast food items took the place of cheap snacks like the pigs in a blanket. But it made a successful comeback in New York where several food stands brought the dish back to the streets. Another delicacy that is native to West Africa is ackee fruit, which in Jamaica is a widely consumed treat and is even their national fruit, but in America is currently banned by the FDA. This is all because ackee fruit, as tasty and soft as it can be, contains hypoglycin, which is a toxin that can cause an allergic reaction you really would not see coming. Let's just say it feels like one of the worst hangovers of your life, and that may be why the sickness caused by ackee fruit has a name. In the world of medicine, it is lovingly referred to as Jamaican vomiting sickness, but do not let pretenses fool you. If too much of it is consumed when it is very ripe, the fruit can very well be fatal. Hence why there's such a tight ban on it.
In the 1970s, Coconut Grove offered an escape to exotic lands with each bite, its coconut filling enveloping taste buds in a wave of tropical bliss. It was the flavor of summer vacations, of sandy beaches, even in the midst of suburbia. This bar found its way into picnic baskets, enjoyed under fireworks on the 4th of July, a taste of paradise amid the celebration of freedom. The Coconut Grove was discontinued in the 80s. The ever-evolving candy market and the introduction of similar products overshadowed its unique appeal. However, the memory of Coconut Grove remains vibrant. It serves as a nostalgic voyage to warmer climates and carefree days spent lounging under the sun, chocolate in hand. Next, let's recall the Creepy Crawler's Thingmaker, an innovation that turned the ordinary American kitchen into a mini monster factory. Launched in the 1960s, this device allowed children to create a plethora of rubbery creatures from heated plastic. However, its very design, featuring an open heating element, posed a significant risk. Burns became a troubling consequence for unsuspecting young creators, leading to a redesign aimed at ensuring safety. Despite its enthralling promise of endless fun, the Thingmaker's hazardous potential marked a pivotal moment in the evaluation of toy safety standards during that era.
Spam musubi's origins are pretty surprising. Originally popular in Hawaii, this spam and rice sushi dish had American soldiers charmed. While it was actually meant for housewives, WW2 soldiers popularized the dish because of the ease with which it could be prepared. They were huge fans of the dish, considering spam was one of the few meats they could easily access during service. So spam musubi was perfect for soldiers who wanted a good meal without too many ingredients. This dish really picked up in popularity around the 1970s. However, its sudden popularity went down after a while. Nowadays, you can still find spam musubi in some Japanese-American fusion joints. It is slowly spreading once again as a reliable breakfast option, making a slow and steady comeback for people who are not soldiers yet want a delicious meal.
The Texan Bar, with its bold slogan and chewy nougat, promised adventure in every wrapper. It was the fuel for imaginations running wild, for backyard cowboys and cowgirls embarking on daring escapades against imaginary foes. This bar was a staple of sleepovers, the perfect snack for late-night storytelling and plans of grandeur. The Texan Bar was discontinued in the mid-80s. It was unable to sustain its momentum in the competitive confectionery market. However, the spirit of the Texan Bar lives on. It evokes memories of dust-kicked boots and the thrill of the chase. It's a reminder of the days when all it took to travel was a bite of chocolate and a dash of daring.
In the 70s, the phrase, "let's get some shark fin soup," was not really that out of pocket. A lot of people enjoyed bowls of this at many restaurants across the USA, but local shark populations had to pay the price in a pretty nasty way as they got their fins removed and then were left in the ocean. While they were a tradition in some cultures, their use was not nearly as intense as the businesses constantly asking for more fins. Eventually, the Senate passed the Shark Fins Elimination Act, which thankfully now makes shark fin products illegal. Over the years, the constant efforts by hunters and other people looking to make a quick paycheck have endangered species, and today the number of sharks is at a record low.
The early 80s heralded the arrival of the Summit Bar, its light wafer and nutty chocolate blend, breaking the mold of the typical candy fare. Reminiscent of afternoons spent at roller skating rinks or browsing the latest records, this bar was a hit for those seeking a quick, delicious snack. The crunch of the wafers evoked the crispness of autumn leaves underfoot on the way to school, a subtle reminder of change and new beginnings. The Summit Bar was discontinued by the mid-80s. Changing tastes and the competitive market led to its decline. However, it lives on in memory, cherished by those who remember the thrill of lacing up skates and the taste of a well-earned treat. Super Elastic Bubble Plastic was the stuff of legends, a whimsical toy that allowed children to create their own colorful, air-filled bubbles. Yet, beneath its vibrant allure lay hidden risks. The chemical composition of the plastic and the inhalation required to blow the bubbles raised health concerns, highlighting the complex balance between innovative play and safety. While captivating in its simplicity and creativity, Super Elastic Bubble Plastic's journey underscores the ongoing dialogue about the materials and methods used in toys, a conversation that continues to shape the landscape of play.
We also had chicken marbella, which rivaled beef options like beef hash. Americans have always enjoyed an incredible variety of food. Popular American chefs Julie Rosso and Sheila Lukens popularized and invented chicken marbella, a dish made using chicken, prunes, olives, and capers. The recipe was first seen in the Silver Palette cookbook. The cookbook recipe was very popular in the Jewish community and quickly became popular amongst larger groups of people across America. Towards the 80s, chefs across the country decided that the chicken marbella needed a revamp. This decision would prove costly as people started disapproving of the dish when chefs added sun-dried tomatoes instead of olives. Clearly, they went a bit overboard, and people began to refrain from ordering the chicken marbella. In a frenzy, dinner joints had to remove the chicken marbella from the menu until they could go back to the original recipe. Since then, restaurants have stuck to the OG flavor more keenly. Ortolans suffered the worst of animal cruelty in a way that really makes you realize no dish is ever worth that kind of torture to another being. Ortolans themselves are these very small songbirds that get imported from France, and they really are about the size of an average thumb. Ortolans were prized for their flavor more than anything else, and eating them was considered to be a pastime of royals reserved exclusively for them. The way it would be prepared was sick, with the tiny things first being blinded to be overfed and then being thrown in brandy before they got marinated live. That's enough to make us lose our appetite for sure, and luckily it was banned in 1999 due to animal abuse.
The milkshake bar in the 70s was more than just chocolate. It was a flashback to diner dates and milkshake sips under neon lights. Its malted flavor was a bridge to those moments, whether it was sharing a shake after school or the anticipation of the first dance. This bar was a companion during walks home, the taste mingling with the sound of crunching leaves. By the late 70s, changes in consumer preferences and the emergence of new confectionery technologies led to the milkshake bar's discontinuation. However, it still stirs memories of jukeboxes and laughter. It continues to flavor the present with reminiscences of malted delights and youthful revelries. The saga of lawn darts, or jarts, as they were colloquially known, is a somber chapter in toy history. Introduced in the 1960s, these metal-tipped darts, intended for outdoor play, soon revealed a darker side. After causing numerous injuries and tragically fatalities, lawn darts were banned in 1988 in the United States. This ban served as a watershed moment in toy safety, illustrating the critical need for oversight and regulation in children's playthings. The story of lawn darts remains a powerful reminder of the responsibilities manufacturers and regulators bear in ensuring the well-being of young enthusiasts.
Chicken croquettes were the heart and soul of road-stop diners everywhere. You could always stop in any state for these breaded and fried chicken patties and they'd be served. Croquettes took off especially around the 1920s. That can explain why people may see them as old-fashioned now. Still, they have been regular for Americans for a long while. It was included in American cookbooks like The Virginia Housewife and Directions for Cookery. That is definitely a testament to its popularity. Chicken croquettes lost their popularity commercially, however, as many roadside stalls and restaurants stopped serving them. As processed and frozen food became common, the snack made a triumphant return as frozen food. Gourmet croquettes also started showing up at newer, trendy restaurants, suggesting a comeback of this beloved food to the States. Sandwiches have always had an icon. Bushmeat, on the other hand, is something that carries a natural risk to it. No human interference needed this time. This is an umbrella term that refers to all kinds of animals caught in the wilds of Africa for daily sustenance. And when we say all kinds, please take that to heart. Bats, lions, as well as monkeys, literally nothing is off the table. These wild animals carry diseases with them. And during the Ebola outbreak from 2013 to 2016, governments started banning the hunting and consumption of bushmeat. It is still smuggled in illegally, though, and it goes for a pretty hefty price.
The Curly Wurly bar, introduced in the early 70s, instantly charmed with its playful shape and delectable taste. It was the go-to snack for arcade warriors, a sugary boost between games of pinball and Pac-Man, its spirals as intricate as the mazes on the screen. The chocolate-coated caramel was a favorite prize for winners of neighborhood scavenger hunts, a symbol of triumph and the sweet taste of victory. The Curly Wurly gradually faded from the American market, overshadowed by newer confections. However, its presence has faded less in other markets. It remains a cherished memory, a reminder of the carefree bliss of childhood competitions. So, let's play. Clackers, those captivating orbs that danced a dangerous ballet in the hands of daring youngsters. Introduced to America's playgrounds in the swinging 60s, these simple toys of two balls connected by a string captivated many with their hypnotic clacking. Yet, this seemingly innocent pastime harbored a hidden peril. By the 1970s, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration stepped in, raising alarms over the toy's shattering risk. The hard acrylic could break, launching sharp shards into the air, a clear danger to any child's face or eyes. Thus, amid concerns and injuries, clackers were subjected to stringent safety regulations, forever changing their presence in the hands of American youth.
Another dish just as beloved as the last is sweet and sour pork. This Cantonese dish found its way into the hearts and bellies of Americans with ease in the 19th century. We have early Chinese migrants to thank for the introduction of sweet and sour pork. In America, it is a lot different than the traditional version. You would get small cubed pork alongside diced bell pepper and rice, and a lot of ketchup. This is the version that made its home in the kitchens of Americans everywhere. It exploded in popularity as a guaranteed item on the menu of mom-and-pop joints. Much like other foods on this list, sweet and sour pork faced a hiccup when it temporarily disappeared from restaurants due to the introduction of newer, fancier variations of pork. The demand for this classic dish never went down, and eventually, restaurants were inclined to bring it back. Nobody can go without margarine, the all-time quintessential breakfast food that everyone from everywhere, both in and out of the U.S., can agree on. One of the more relaxing parts of spreading big dabs of margarine on your toast is knowing that it is not really bad for you, and that should be the case by all means until you add trans fats in. These fats would be put into the spread, and this was an industry-wide practice until it got banned by the FDA as it became linked to heart disease and diabetes. In particularly extreme cases, it puts you at a higher risk for cancer, and that is just too much trouble for butter of all things.
Space food sticks tapped into the cosmic curiosity of the 60s, offering a taste of astronaut life to those grounded on Earth. They were the snack of choice for starry-eyed kids camped out under the night sky, wishing upon stars and dreaming of moon landings. This futuristic treat was a staple in lunchboxes, a conversation starter that bridged the gap between science fiction and the lunchroom. Space food sticks were phased out as public fascination with space exploration waned. Snack preferences shifted towards more natural, health-focused options. However, their legacy endures. It's a testament to a time when the universe seemed within reach and the possibilities as endless as the cosmos itself. Enter the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Laboratory, the pinnacle of educational toys with a twist of danger, available briefly before its discontinuation in 1952. Promising to unlock the mysteries of atomic energy for curious minds, this set included actual radioactive materials. Safety concerns quickly overshadowed its educational value as the potential for harmful exposure became apparent. This bold foray into hands-on science education left its mark as a cautionary tale of ambition outpacing safety, illustrating a pivotal moment in the evolution of consumer awareness and regulation. The Choco Light bar, with its unique airy texture, offered a bite of whimsy in the 70s. It was the coveted snack at movie matinees, a lighter alternative to the usual fare, blending perfectly with the rustle of popcorn and the dimming of lights. This chocolate bar was a favorite among friends, shared on park benches as tales of summer adventures were exchanged. The Choco Light was discontinued due to the complexity of its production process. The shift towards simpler, more cost-effective confectionery options by the 80s played a role. However, the memory of Choco Light remains a fluffy cloud in the sky of snacks. It's a sweet reminder of laughter shared under the open sky and the gentle joy of chocolate melting on the tongue.
If this video had your mind spinning, make sure to like, subscribe, and don't forget to let us know which of these items shocked you the most.